Okay, to begin then, difference and inequality are foundational to educational ethnography in the United States. In schools and other educational contexts, difference and inequality are continually being marked, staged, recorded, interpreted, negotiated, manipulated, and contested. By directing attention to difference and inequality, educational ethnography has provided a consistent alternative to much U.S. educational research. Most of the research in education in the U.S. focuses mostly on working within rather than seriously questioning or challenging the prevailing structures, organizations, and ideologies of American education and schools. Ethnography, educational ethnography, I think, has been a contrast to this. And since the 1950s, at least, let's see if this, and I quote here, educational ethnographers have searched for ways to conceive and confront the institutional arrangements that have turned schools against children and teachers. They've expressed outrage about what gets done in the name of schooling, a skepticism about the received categories that make it easy to mismeasure kinds of children and kinds of learning, a distrust of national efforts to change and reform. And they've given attention to real people in action as the site for the drama of schooling to reveal its connections to ongoing inequalities and injustices. In this presentation, I'm going to draw attention to 5 themes in the way I think U.S. ethnographers have framed the conversation about difference and inequality over the past several decades. Some of these framings emerged much earlier than others, but I think all 5 remain thematic in educational ethnography today. There are, of course, other themes that I might have highlighted, but I think these 5 have been especially influential. And I'm going to review these themes rather quickly and talk about some of the ways that my own work has represented them, and also the way other people's work has represented them. So the first theme that I want to draw your attention to is cultural difference and unequal school performance. This framing of the conversation became prominent in the 1950s when educational anthropology emerged as a subfield of U.S. cultural anthropology. At the time, most anthropologists conceived of culture as an adaptive collective response to particular environmental, social, economic, political, and historical conditions. That response was a distinctive way of life, a culture, including characteristic institutions, social arrangements, survival strategies, child rearing practices, values, beliefs, language, customs, and so forth. Cultural differences arose when groups faced different conditions and these differences were maintained as long as the response to those conditions remained adaptive. Although cultures were different, none was inherently or universally better adapted. Some were better adapted to particular circumstances than others, including the fact that some were more successful at colonizing or dominating than others were. In the U.S. context, Native Americans, non-Protestant, non-white, religious, ethnic, and racial groups, recent immigrants, non-English speakers, and poor people came to be marked in various ways over time as culturally different from the American norm. As groups, those who fit the norm tended to have greater wealth and power, including the power to control schooling and to label the other and to enforce the notion of difference. In this view of culture and cultural difference, children acquire culture from child rearing practices at home and in the neighboring communities. Different child rearing practices produce different patterns of behavior, beliefs, language use, and normative expectations. Sometimes these cultural practices and patterns match or closely overlap with those of the schools, and sometimes they don't. Many of the best known ethnographers of education today have conducted research in schools and classrooms to document the effects of cultural differences on school performance and outcomes. So you will probably recognize some of these works. Shirley Bryce Heath's very famous Ways with Words. Norma Gonzalez and Luis Moll's Funds of Knowledge. These and many other works are in this tradition. I would summarize this by saying that this theme, as ethnographers have found that when behaviors and norms expected and learned at home align with those expected at school, students are likely to do well in school. When these behaviors and norms do not align and go unrecognized or in some cases demeaned, students are likely to do poorly in school through no fault of their own. In consequence, educational ethnographers have repeatedly argued that mainstream schools should be changed to value and accommodate cultural differences so that non-dominant students could feel more comfortable, teachers could better understand those students, and non-dominant students could do better in school. Some policies, schools, curricula have been developed in accord with this recommendation, but sadly, most have not. The effort to make schooling more culturally situated, relevant, sensitive, responsive for non-dominant students endures to this day, including in the work of some of your faculty here, Gloria Ladson-Billings, Carl Grant, others.